Good morning, everyone. It is Friday, March 12th, and we're so happy to be with you today. We have a really good Bible reading for you, our next 4 chapters, Exodus 23, John chapter 2. We're still in the Gospel of John, just started. Got a good chapter there for you as well. Job chapter 41, the second to last chapter of the book of Job. We're wrapping it up. And then also 2 Corinthians chapter 11. Remember, we are here to read, to glean, and beam for Jesus. Right here, we start in Exodus chapter 23, very powerful explanation of, in a way, the 10 Commandments, all these chapters, all these laws, expounding on what we already know and what God shared and why. What's the purpose of living this way? What is the ethics of living a godly life? And so we see here in Exodus chapter 23, verse 1, it talks about being a false witness. And we know that's one of the commandments. Do not be a false witness. Do not bear false witness against your neighbor. And here it is explaining it. Exodus chapter 23, verse 1, you shall not spread of false reports. You shall not join hands with the wicked to act in a malicious way. You shall not follow the majority in wrongdoing when you bear witness in a lawsuit. You shall not side with the majority so as to pervert justice. Do not take a bribe, as it says later on. Do not give a false charge in verse 6 and 7 and 8. So there's a big importance about being honest. You know, God is about truth, right? We know in the New Testament, Jesus says, I am the way, the truth, and the life. And so we realize honesty, light is not darkness. You know, all these things resonate with who God is. And so if we're his representatives, we cannot be false witnesses. And then it talks about verse 9, repressing the resident alien. Remember, God always says, treat the resident alien as I treated you. Why? Because you were once slaves in Egypt as well. It says also, on the 7th year you shall let your land rest. 6 days you shall work, 7th day you should rest. Same with the land. 6 years, let it produce, and then the 7th year, let it rest. Do not overtake the land. Guess what? God created everything with life. Those things need rest too. God talks about spending time with him. Verse 14, 3 times a year you shall hold a festival for me. It talks about the Passover. It talks about the first fruits. It talks about ingathering. And it talks about the importance of giving back to God what belongs to him. So you can see the importance of these things. We won't go into it too much right now, but first fruits pretty much is the first produce of the land. Just like you have the firstborn child is dedicated to the Lord. That's the first child, the first fruit. Also, when you have land, when you have money, when you have things other than tithe, you give the first fruits. You give the best to the Lord. This is in addition to, not necessarily a requirement that we look at as tithe and offering. But when you look at your offerings or your finances, you give the first of the Lord. When you get money for birthdays, people say, well, should you tithe on that or not? It's like, well, it's an increase. And so when you look at giving to God what you have been given, what you have been increased, you should give on that as well. We can go into that more another time, but first fruits is really big to God because it's a recognition of him giving everything to you. Then it talks about an angel leading them. And it's not necessarily like a physical angel going in front of them and leading them. It's talking about the Spirit of God. As God leads you into this land in front of the Hivites, the Jebusites, the Canaanites, the Perizzites, all of them, God's going to lead you. Do not bow down to them. Do not serve them. Utterly destroy them. Do not bring on their practices of worship, of divination or anything, because God's going to remove them. This is pretty much saying the angel of the Lord, God, Jesus, is going to remove all of these, and you have to be faithful to him, and he will remove all of them. Notice what he also says. He will, in verse 25, you will worship the Lord your God, and I will bless your bread and your water. God will supply all your needs, and he will take away the sickness from among you. No one should even have a miscarriage, or no woman would be barren. That's a huge promise, especially during this time and age when the health system is non-existent. And this is the time when, hey, if a woman gives birth and there's a complication, she probably dies because there's nothing to intervene. And so for God to say that and none of them to go barren or none of them to miscarry or none of the women to even get hurt, that's pretty strong. That's pretty strong. Will also make your enemies turn their backs to you. Verse 29, notice why God doesn't get rid of the enemies all at once. Why doesn't God just clear the land, sweep it clean, and let them rule? Well, notice what it says in verse 29. I will not drive them out before you in 1 year, or the land would be overcome and desolate by wild animals, and they will multiply against you. God's like, look, I'm going to remove them as you are blessed, as you grow, as you can handle. This is the blessings of God explained in the New Testament. God's not going to give you beyond what you can handle. God's going to be able to give you what you can handle, what you are trusted with your talents and your gifts. And as you grow and develop, He will remove more. That's a beautiful promise. So little by little, I will drive them out before you until you have increased and possessed the land. You will have the land from the Red Sea to the Philistines, from the Euphrates on one hand, and I will drive them out. Just do not make a covenant with these foreigners. God's just spelling it out step by step, ethic by ethic, law by law, policy by policy of what it means to serve and love Him. And church, I think this is a beautiful way to understand who God is, because it's very practical living, especially in this day and age when our country and our world is a mess. We need good policy, we need good rules, we need good legislation, and God here is just outlining what it looks like. And so be encouraged that we serve a God of order and that God is still in control today. Amen. John chapter 2. Now, I want to highlight something, that this is Jesus' first miracle, the wedding. Obviously, Jesus himself says in this story, as he's talking to his mom, my time is not yet come. You see, Jesus had a plan. Jesus had a plan to do a miracle at another time, but his mom kind of forced his hand in a way where he thought, you know what, I'll go ahead and do this. But notice, Jesus' changing the plans didn't change his mission. Jesus' mission was still to show people that he was who he was. And people believed, at the end of the story, they believed that Jesus says who he says he was, or would reveal himself at some point. And so I think when we need to realize, as a take-home, as a valuable point for us, we may not get everything we want, everything may not go as planned, but as we serve God, that's our mission. Plain and simple, your mission is to serve God. And if you are serving God, regardless of what come what may, you're serving His purpose. And if we, all of us, can get to that point of realizing that come what may, we know that God's going to be glorified. And that's the beautiful truth about following God, is that as you are following Him, you know whatever comes what may, God's going to make a way, and He's going to use you for His glory. As we're going to talk a little bit more about Job in a little bit. But God just did a miracle. And this is the next story, is the Passover Feast. Now, in the Gospels, the Synoptic Gospels, this story comes towards the end of his ministry. Here in John, it comes at the beginning. And so you ask yourself, well, was this in the beginning of his ministry or at the end? Well, we believe it was at the end. But the reason why it's in the beginning here in the book of John is because John is not doing the story necessarily completely in chronological order. He's building a theological point. Why? Because the book of John, reminder, is an argument against the philosophies of the times, of those who believe in other ways of believing, of other gods, of other philosophies. And John is making a theological, philosophical argument on who Jesus is in his character. From the beginning, he's talking about the temple that's here will be destroyed, acknowledging that there's something bigger than the Jewish nation, acknowledging that Jesus is superior and bigger and greater, and he is something new, and he is above. And so what he is saying in verse 19, for example, Jesus answered them, destroy this temple, and in 3 days I will raise it up. The Jews said, this temple has been under construction for 46 years. Will you raise it up in 3 days? But he was speaking about the temple of his body. After he was raised from the dead, his disciples remembered what he said, and they believed the scriptures of what's spoken with him. And so Jesus is constantly telling them. Verse 24, but Jesus on his part would not entrust himself to them, because he knew all people and needed no one to testify about him, for he himself knew what everyone was. So God was waiting to reveal himself in time. So it's establishing that at the end of John chapter 2, from the very beginning, God couldn't trust people with his identity because they would misuse it, they would mess it up, he would come out before he gave his teachings, gave the truths, built up his repertoire where people realized he was who he was. And so you could see in the same way, in the wedding of Cana, Jesus says, my time wasn't come, but he didn't stop his mission. And so that's encouragement to you. Come what may, focus on your mission, because regardless of the details that happen in life, God can still use you to glorify his name. And Jesus served because he reminded that he is bigger than the Jewish nation. He is bigger than being in a box. Jesus came to serve and to transform the world. And that's the theological argument on many philosophical differences that people have. Jesus is God, and he came to save us from sin and transform reality to something more powerful called the kingdom of God that we could live in and serve. Powerful, powerful, powerful message in the book of John. Now we're going to be looking at Job, if I could find it in here. I think I took it out. We're in Job chapter 41. I took out my little placeholder there. Job chapter 41. Now it's time to God to continually talk about his greatness. Isn't it good to hear about God's greatness? it's not so much boastful. It's in a way of reminding people why he has the authority that he does. And so he talked about the behemoth, he talked about our creation. Now chapter 41, he really talks about the force and power of Leviathan. Now, why is he talking about Leviathan's force and power? Well, if Leviathan is unstoppable, if Leviathan is unbeatable, and people fear him, people are scared of him, how much more about God then? Because God created him. And as people relate to Leviathan and are terrified of him, people are terrified of God because of his strength, his might. You can't put it in an animal. You can't look at it and say, wow, this is all that God encapsulates. God is encapsulatable, if that's a word. God is uncapsulatable. Leviathan is. You could look at him, he's tall, he's big, he's strong, but you could wrap your mind around him. You can't wrap your mind around God, as it says here. Verse 1 of chapter 41. Can you draw out Leviathan with a fish hook? Can you put a rope in his nose? Can you play with it as a bird? Can you put a leash on it for little girls? I'm just skipping around on some of the highlights of this. Any hope of capturing it will be disappointed. I will not keep silent concerning its limbs. They're mighty, they're splendid. Who could strip off its outer garments? It sneezes, flashes fire and light, and its eyes are like the eyelids of dawn. For its mouth goes out flaming torches, sparks fire leap out of its nostrils comes smoke. Its breath kindles coals. It is firmly cast and is immovable. Wow. When it raises itself up to the gods, they are afraid. It continues. It counts iron as straw. Clubs are counted as chaff. It laughs at the rattle of javelins that are probably thrown at it. On earth, it has no equal, a creature without fear. So God's pretty much saying, this Leviathan guy is unstoppable. And yet, I created him. What does that say about me, Job? God's really making a strong parallel about his power. And then we finished with our last chapter, 2 Corinthians chapter 11. Paul is defending himself because apparently people don't believe what he's saying. They don't believe his credibility. They don't think he's good enough. He's smart enough. He's great enough. And so Paul, in a way, has to stoop to their level because to make it clear about, yeah, God called me to be here. It says here, I wish you would bear with me in a little foolishness. Please bear with my foolishness. I promised you in marriage to one husband, to present you a chaste virgin to Christ, but you guys are being led astray by all sorts of craziness. Now, I'm not inferior to these super apostles, maybe these other Jews, maybe these other powerful speakers, because Paul is not a public speaker. It says that in the next verse 6, I may be untrained in speech, but not in knowledge. Paul is incredibly educated. He has multiple languages. He has multiple passports, as it were. He can be he's a Roman, but he's also a Jew. He goes to all different places, and so this guy's well versed and well spoken. He's like, look, don't think I'm anything less just because I'm not a powerful public speaker. He says, when I came to minister to you, I robbed other churches by accepting support from them in order to serve you. So I refrain and will continue to refrain from burdening you in any way. I have a heart of God. I have a heart of gold. I love you so much. I'm giving my all to you, and you still condemn me and think I'm less. He says, but I will also boast for this reason. Or do not listen to these other people who boast. Notice what it says here in verse 12. And what I do, I will also continue to do in order to deny any opportunity to those who want an opportunity to be recognized as our equals in what they boast about. People are constantly boasting about who they are, what they accomplish, and they try to make it look like that we're equals and they're even superior. But notice what Paul says. For such boasters are false apostles, deceitful workers, disguising themselves as apostles of Christ. Even Satan disguises himself as an angel of light. Stop trying to boost yourself up to make others like you. It says their end will match their deeds. Notice what it says in verse 16. I repeat, let no one think that I am a fool, but if I do, then accept me as a fool, so that I too may boast a little. He's like, all right, so you guys are allowing these other people to boast. I'm going to start boasting too. And he says, but this is of human standard, it's of human weakness, and it's not good. So he's acknowledging what I'm about to do is not good, but you need to understand that I have authority because of what I've been through as well. He says, but whatever anyone dares to boast of, do I speak as a fool? Let me show you. Verse 22, am I a Hebrew? Are they Hebrews? So am I. Are they Israelites? So am I. Are they descendants of Abraham? So am I. Are they ministers of Christ? I'm talking like a madman because I'm boasting and I shouldn't because Christ told us not to. But yeah, I have. I have suffered imprisonments, floggings. 5 times I received from the Jews beatings. I received 40 lashes minus 1 multiple times. 3 times I was beaten with rods. I received stoning. 3 times I was shipwrecked. I fought Night and day I was adrift at sea, frequently in danger in rivers, from bandits, from my own people, from Gentiles, in the city, in the wilderness, from false prophets, from the sea, from hardships, sleepless nights, hungry and thirsty, without food, cold and naked. And most importantly, I've been under deep anxiety and pressure because I care and love you guys so much. That just breaks my heart. He says, if I must boast, I will boast of the things that show my weaknesses, because I know by boasting my weaknesses, God's going to shine through those weaknesses, and it's going to be impossible for me to claim goodness. That's when you are at your best, when you could boast of your weaknesses, and yet God makes those your strengths, and he shines it through, and people are saying, wow, God did something amazing through this person. Notice what he says, I do not lie. In Damascus, the governor, even King Aretas, guarded the city of Damascus in order to seize me, but I was let down in a basket through a window wall and escaped from his hands. You see, Paul is saying, I've been through everything as a minister. I've been through everything as a gospel worker, and yet you think less of me. I need to tell you my journey. And that's what we need to share as Christians. We don't need to boast about how good we are, how great. Just share your journey, share your life, share where God has been, and people are going to be touched and moved by it. What better way to share who God is by sharing what he's done in your life? And you can't do that unless you don't know the word. So I encourage you to keep reading, keep gleaning, and beam and share your story for Jesus. God bless you.